Part 2. She smiled and noted that I was home from work early. I didn't say a word to her. I just walked down the hall into our bedroom. I got a suitcase out of the closet and began packing clothes for the work week for my stay in a hotel room. She came into the bedroom, saw me packing and asked if I had to go on a sudden business trip. I stopped what I was doing, looked directly at her with a stare of absolute loathing, then continued packing. She walked up to me, asked me what was wrong and placed her hand on my back. I recoiled from her touch like I just had some dead animal carcass filled with maggots touch me. I turned and yelled at her loudly to never touch me again before pushing her away. When she tried to ask what was wrong, I called her a disease-filled whore that deserved to have a fiery hot poker inserted into her privates to keep her from procreating. She had the audacity to look shocked and hurt. That's when I pulled out the stack of papers I'd copied, threw them onto the bed, closed my suitcase and began to leave. She sat down to look at the papers. Before I got down the hall, I heard her scream no before breaking down in tears and running to catch me. I made it out the door to my car and threw my suitcase in the back. She managed to make it outside before I pulled off. I extended my middle finger in her direction as I drove away. My phone started going off like a casino slot machine, so I just turned it off. My plan was to completely ghost her and let whatever steps needed to be done for divorce taken care of by my lawyer. I didn't want to know how they met, why it happened and what exactly had occurred between them. She knew damn well infidelity was a deal breaker. Why she was even calling I had no idea but didn't care. I got a motel room about a mile from my job and checked in. I walked to an adjacent restaurant and forced down some food I didn't want to eat. Back in the room I used the motel phone to call my mom and tell her where I was. She'd been worried as she'd been one of the first people my wife had called after I left. I asked my mom if she'd been told why I left, and she admitted she hadn't. I told her what I'd found, explained we would be divorcing, and I'd be looking for a job in another state, so I never had to run into my STBXW or any of her family again. I asked her to keep what she knew between her, my dad, and siblings. My mom cried. I mean, I wasn't there to see it, but it sounded like ugly crying and disbelief. But the realization my wife and her family were no longer any part of our lives hurt. I'm sure knowing she'd never hold a grandchild fathered by me hurt a lot too. But she knew how I was raised, so she also knew I was done. I was exhausted after the call with my mom. So, I cried myself to sleep only to be awakened by a knock at the door around midnight. I got up and looked out the peephole to see my STBXW anxiously waiting for me to open the door. I couldn't grasp how she'd found me, much the less figured out what room I was in. But I did not want to see her or hear her voice. After what she did to me, she lost any right to even look in my general direction. So again, I used the motel phone. But instead of calling my mom, I called the local police. I stayed on the line explaining the situation as they sent 2 officers. I watched as the police removed my STBXW from in front of the door and led her over to the squad car. Then one officer knocked on the door and I let him into the room. He assured me they wouldn't let my wife in and asked how I wanted them to proceed. I explained I wanted her to leave me alone and I wanted absolutely no contact with her ever again. He and I filled out all the necessary paperwork for a restraining order. He made sure the row was what I wanted since it would limit me from being able to go back to my house on my own to get things without police escort. I told him I never wanted to enter that house again. I was done with her and she could have it and the rest of our belongings. He got her to sign the row. I watched her and the cops drive away, then went back to bed for a few hours. I made it to work the next day. Everyone asked how I was feeling since they all thought I left due to being ill. I told them I still felt a bit under the weather and told them I'd be working in my office all day just in case what I had was contagious. I called my boss and asked him for a good time to meet in my office. 15 minutes later he was sitting across from me. I'm sure he was there to get an update on the project my team was working on. When I explained the previous day I'd discovered my wife had been cheating, he seemed almost as shocked as I was. I didn't begin to mention I'd soon be looking for another job out of state. But I did convey there was no chance of reconciliation, and as far as I was concerned my wife was dead to me. It was all I could do to maintain composure and not cry. But I explained to my boss that I planned to dive into my work to distract me from my personal life. I explained at that moment I need the actual work far more than I needed the paycheck which came with it. He assured me I could work as much as I wanted and even crash in my office when needed. I thanked him for his kindness before asking him to keep everything between us until word leaked out. After work that day I went by my parents' house for dinner. They had all my siblings and their spouses over as well. My parents called me aside as dinner was ending and suggested I let everyone there know what had happened and was about to happen. There were still a few people eating when I began to talk. But the news sort of ruined everyone's appetites. They all were as shocked and enraged as I had been. 2 of my siblings had gotten calls from my ex when I left and had felt sorry for her. Both wished they'd known what was going down so they could have given her a piece of their minds. I assured them and the rest of my family I just wanted my wife, and anyone related to her ignored, blocked from contact and ostracized. I explained it wasn't her family's fault that my wife is a worthless whore. And my wife had proved she was unworthy of any attention positive or negative sent her way. I then explained I would be looking for a new job in another state over the coming weeks. Some family members were angered. They weren't mad at me for feeling that is what I needed to do. They were mad my wife sinned, and I was being punished by being removed from those that love and care about me. It didn't seem even remotely fair, I agreed. But the chances of getting every human related to her to leave the state out of shame wasn't happening. The next day I met with my lawyer for the first time. We live in an at-fault state, so the stack of papers proving infidelity was a welcome sight to her. I tried to approach that meeting with 100% logic and no emotion. All emotions are temporary, and letting your emotions lead you through life is a recipe for utter chaos. I explained she and her staff would need to be the go-between for my wife and I until the divorce was finalized. I also explained there was a restraining order in place. I told her I didn't care about any of our possessions. Everything we owned reminded me of my STBXW, so I didn't want a single item or the house we lived in. The only thing I was concerned with was that she could not touch my 401k or other investments given to me before marriage. That's when my lawyer asked if I wanted the divorce to be a fair and equal divorce, or scorched earth. I looked down and thought for a few moments. The emotional turmoil I was enduring had reached the point it was causing actual physical pain. I knew the events I was living through had changed everything forever and there was no going back. A week before, if I'd been presented with a fair or no holes barred option, I would have gone with the fair route. But I felt nothing but loathing and disgust for the woman who lied to me nearly my whole life and betrayed me like no one else had. I instructed my lawyer to take every available avenue to make the divorce as painful as possible. Any item my lawyer managed to get from my STBXW for me would just go into a big bonfire after everything was finalized. But at that moment I envisioned that bonfire being so large and bright it could be seen from space. I wanted her to go after my wife financially, and if they could figure out who the AP was, to go after him as well. My state has alienation of affection laws which allows a person to sue someone who contributed to the end of a marriage in civil court. I told my lawyer if they discovered he is in a relationship to contact his partner. In short, I wanted to make everything hell on earth for them both. I wanted to convey to my wife I hated her beyond words, and I was out for blood. I wanted to destroy her life like she'd so casually destroyed mine and let the pieces fall where they may. My lawyer called me at work today to let me know my wife had been served at her job. She asked me to come by after work to talk with a messenger they'd sent to serve my wife papers. Just knowing she'd been served and was grasping I would never be any part of her life again was enough. But I decided to listen to the messenger in the sole hopes he might tell me my STBXW jumped out of a window after being served. He and I sat in an office without my lawyer present as he explained he'd taken the paperwork by the school at around 10 a.m. He checked in with the front office as a courier and a member of the faculty led him to my wife's classroom. She was in the middle of a lesson as the employee opened the door. The courier said he walked past the staff member, asked my wife to verify her name and told her she had now been served with official divorce papers due to infidelity. He said my STBXW was obviously shocked at the speed I was moving, embarrassed to be served at work in front of her students, and was fighting back tears. He told me as he walked out, she fell into the floor and began sobbing uncontrollably. That was all good to hear and I was glad she'd gotten the paperwork. Honestly, I'm not even sure why I'm writing this out. It's been a bit cathartic, but I don't need advice. Well, at least I don't think so. As stated, I have everything planned out and the divorce is in motion and will take place. I just hurt so bad and I'm truly struggling to find a reason to carry on. I don't want to. I'm not suicidal. There is no part of me that wants to die. I want my life back and that is an impossibility. Thanks you for watching. Everyday new movies. See you soon.